Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron Blade, and I'm the editor, creator, and producer of what you're watching right now, Blade Talk. If you are new here, welcome, and you found this presentation helpful, informative, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, do me an even greater favor, and subscribe to my channel. Always appreciate all the support that I am given. So, I recently got an email that I found hilarious, and I just had to respond to it. It basically said that they appreciated how I broke down Jewish law, all right, Jewish history, etc., especially over the last two presentations, right? And they found a lot of knowledge that they didn't know, right? So it was very useful information that I gave. Most notably, this idea that Israel was better and doing just fine without a king. Basically, the point was that once we got a king, everything went downhill from there. Assuming that before we got a king, everything was just peaceful and everything was great. Or was it? Alright, so I had to address this one. It seems like I'm telling Jewish history in reverse. We're going backwards instead of forwards, right? Nevertheless, here we are. So, was the state of Israel better off when they governed themselves without a king, right? We don't need a centralized government, do we? Let's take a look. Now, in order to answer this question, we have to go back to around 1250 BCE, okay? After wandering in the desert for 40 years, the new generation stood ready for the task at hand, okay? And they had their work cut out for them, okay? They were ordered to conquer the Holy Land and build a holy society there, right? It's no small feat. What's more is that we had essentially lost our great teacher and mentor, Moses. All right? So, of course, who was in charge? Joshua, right? He had all of the makings for the role, right? His resume was impeccable. He was chosen by God, mentored by Moses, led the people in battle while in the wilderness, and bravely stood up to fellow leaders, okay? So he had the resume for the position. And Joshua's basic message was, with God's help, we can do anything, right? Now, the land of Canaan was bordered by two great empires, okay? Mesopotamia and Egypt, but neither really ruled it, okay? In fact, one might say no one really ruled Canaan, okay? There were 31 fortified city-states controlled by various kings and divided among the 7 indigenous Canaanite tribes. So, as we will see, this situation essentially favored the Israelites, right? Joshua dispatched 2 spies to the Jericho region for recon. The spies were discovered, but their beautiful innkeeper tipped them off and essentially saved the mission, okay? The Israelites' first battle was Jericho, right? And that's assuming that you can even call it a battle, right? I mean, there wasn't much of a fight. At God's command, they circled the city every day for 7 days, with the priests blowing ram's horns. On the last day, the people shouted and the city walls collapsed. Jericho was easily conquered and the city was burned. Right? Now, the Canaanite kings and the surrounding areas heard of the Battle of Jericho and vowed to fight us. Right? Now, I want to draw a caveat here. Okay, we'll get back to the story, but I want to draw a caveat here. Okay? Many critics of the Israelites, of the Bible, etc., charge the Israelites with committing genocide. Right? So, it's important to note that, one, this was a different time period, right? There's very few nations on this earth that has been conquered or otherwise, established, let's call it that, without someone coming in or some kind of war or military conflict, what have you, all right? That's number one. Number two, according to the Talmud, Joshua sent not one, not two, but 3 letters to the kings of all the tribes, the leaders of all the tribes, right? And basically gave them 2 choices. Either observe the laws of Noah, right? 7 universal laws, right? Or leave the land. So Joshua gave these individuals, these people, 3 chances to abandon their evil ways, because let's not get it twisted. The Canaanites were evil. They committed countless atrocities, okay? Including bestiality, child sacrifice, right? These weren't good people at all, okay? Nevertheless, Joshua gave these individuals 3 chances. Either act civilized and value life, or leave. So, of course, they chose to stay and fight. And again, before you call the Israelites heartless and, oh my gosh, they just wiped them out, etc., etc., right? Keep in mind that this land was promised to Abraham. Abraham's descendants, I should say. Right? Now, God promised Abraham that we were going to enter this land. That span of from when God promised Abraham to when we were knocking on the front doors of the land of Canaan is a huge gap. It's 400 years. So essentially, God gave the land of Canaan, the Canaanites, 400 years to get their act together. Who knows how many prophets God sent to them? 400 years to say, stop the adultery, the bestiality, the child sacrifice, right? They didn't value life, etc., etc. Okay? So, I just like to draw that caveat because some have accused the Jews of, oh, you remember when you all committed genocide against the Canaanites, etc., etc., right? We gave them 3 chances. They had 400 years to get their act together. And essentially, the ones who chose to stay were the only ones that were wiped out, right? There were some people that essentially left, right? And contrary to the command of wiping out, all of the our arch enemies and whatnot in the land, we actually didn't. And because we didn't, if you read the book of Esther, Haman is a descendant of one of our arch enemies. And he came very close to bringing all of us down and completely wiping out all the Jewish people. All right. So, again, I like to draw that caveat just to, shed a little bit of background light on, what we did in terms of, taking over the land of Canaan. Now back to our regular scheduled program. So, after hearing about the battle in Jericho, the kings vowed to band together and fight us. One of the tribes, the Gibeonites, secretly made peace with the Israelites, which led to other Canaanite kings attacking Gibeon. Right? Gibeon, of course, contacted Joshua for help, and Joshua and his men defeated the Canaanite armies because of a famous miracle that essentially helped them. See, at Joshua's request, God kept the sun in the sky for an entire day. For an entire day, 24 hours, so Israel could crush its enemies. Okay? After all the battles were won, they distributed the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? Under Joshua's rule, the Israelites remained faithful to God. Sounds like a happily ever after, right? The end, right? Not too fast. Trouble lingered ahead in the generations following Joshua's death, okay? Too frequently, they rejected God and worshipped idols. So, this was before kings were established, right? Before the institution of kings, or this whole monarchy system, there were judges, and these judges were appointed by virtue of their Bible wisdom, their righteousness, and general respected leadership abilities. Okay? Now, let's go into a couple of the judges. One of them, being one of the most prominent, was Devorah, right? She was the only woman to have that role, and she was also a prophetess, right? In her day, Israel was oppressed by Yavin, the king of Hazor. Devorah instructed her general Barak to engage Sisera, Gavin's commander. Barak agreed to go, but only if Devorah would join him. The forces, I don't know whether it was for fear or, he just wanted to prove a point, whatever the case may be. Nevertheless, ultimately, Devorah agreed to go with him, but she let him know that because she's going, a woman would take credit for the victory. Okay? The forces of Israel killed every single soldier. All of their enemies. Okay? So here's where the story gets a little gruesome. Alright? And needs kind of a PG-13 rating. Alright? So you may want to pause here to allow young children and puppies to leave the room. So Sisera managed to escape from the battle and arrive at a tent of Heber the Kenite. Heber had peaceful relations with Yavin. Unfortunately, for Sisera, Hever's wife, Yael, was at home, who was sympathetic to the Israelites. Yael welcomed him into her tent to, of course, get some rest. She gave him some milk and a blanket to sleep, etc., etc. A statement in the Talmud states that Yael found another way to tire him out, but again, let's keep this PG-13. Yael took advantage of him being asleep and drove a tent peg right through his temple. Okay. Devorah wrote a song of praise for Yael. Devorah was known as the mother of Israel. Thanks to her, the Israelites enjoyed peace for 40 years. Okay? So, what I love about that story and Devorah playing such a crucial role is many believe that women can't be judges, right? Women can't be rabbis. Women can't be etc., etc. But yet Devorah was a judge, a military commander, and a prophetess, and everyone respected her in that role, and the Israelites knew peace for 40 years. For 40 years. And God selected her. Now, of course, some people like to push back and, it was, she wasn't a judge like we understand judge. She wasn't a prophet like we understand prophets. And, it was because there was a bunch of weak men at the time, etc., etc. Find these excuses dubious at best, and really they're trying to put a stain on Devorah's legacy, and I don't too much care for that. The fact is that Devorah was a military commander. She was a prophetess, and she was one of the greatest judges we ever had. Period. So I like to draw that caveat to say that women in leadership roles are not new to Judaism, and a lot of times they actually can do great things that, according to the book of Judges, men at that time couldn't do. Right? I mean, it was her general Barak that didn't want to go in, unless he had her by his side. Again, whether it's for fear or whether it's for moral support, whatever the case may be, or he just wanted to have a prophet around, just to increase morale or boost the morale or whatever the case may be. The bottom line is that Devorah was an impeccable judge. All right. Now, getting back to the story again, this is before we had a king. All right, this is when judges rule. Now we get to the last of the named judges, the mighty Samson. Right? He had superhuman strength and could kill a lion with his bare hands. He wiped out an entire Philistine army using nothing more than the jawbone of a donkey. But Samson had an Achilles heel. Well, hair, anyway. If his long locks were trimmed, he would instantly lose his strength. What is less known was that Samson was a Nazir, a person that took a special vow, including not cutting your hair. Of course, being a Nazir didn't give you any special strength and whatnot. Samson received that ability from God. However, if his vow was violated, the gift would essentially go away. So, Samson's downfall came from a woman named Delilah. The Philistines had bribed her to learn the secret to Samson's great strength. Okay? She learned that It was his hair. Right? While he was asleep, the Philistines gouged out his eyes and cut his hair and put him in shackles. They brought him to Gaza, where he was put to hard labor. During the Philistines' festival, they put him on display in their temple. Right? 3,000 that were in attendance in that temple mocked him. Samson asked to rest near a pillar, and while he was there, he essentially prayed to God. He asked and begged and pleaded with God to give him his strength one last time. One last time. And God granted the request. Samson grabbed 2 pillars of the temple and cried out, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pulled with all his might and brought the entire building crashing down, killing everyone inside. And of course, that was the end of Samson. Samson was an amazing judge as well, though his desire for women remains questionable, right? For certain women, I should say. Now, if the Yael story was graphic, there's a terrible story in the book of Judges that is... it's hard for me to even talk about, right? But I feel that we can learn from it, so I'll go ahead and tell it. It offers a graphic illustration of what can happen when a society lacks a strong central authority. Okay? The story is known as the concubine of Giva, right? It begins when a concubine of a man from the tribe of Levi leaves him and returns to her father's house. The Levites set out to retrieve her and eventually persuade her to come back. On the way back, they stopped in a city in the region of Benjamin known as Giva, right? An old man took the Levite and the concubine into his house for the night. Later that night, a group of men came to the house and demanded he turn over his guest, the Levite, so they could sodomize him. The old man pleaded with them and offered to give them his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine. The men would listen, and the Levite pushed his concubine out of the house. Now again, this put it in the time period, right? Women, unfortunately at that time, were viewed as property, right? They didn't have the same rights as men in certain areas, right? So keep that in mind. So the townspeople raped and abused her all night long. In the morning, she was found dead at the entrance of the house. The Levite put her on his donkey and brought her home. Once there, he did something strange. He cut up her corpse into 12 pieces and sent them throughout the territory of Israel. The Levite was outraged and sending a clear message that something needed to be done to those responsible, right? The people's response was overwhelming. 400,000 fighting men, including all the leaders of the tribes, descended upon the territory of Benjamin. All of Israel united against the town of Giva, demanding to know how such a thing could possibly happen and for those responsible to be handed over and brought to justice. Right? Now, the people of Benjamin would not yield. They wouldn't give him up. And what's more, they chose war. The 400,000 men apparently didn't intimidate them. That show of force wasn't enough. They actually chose war. So, the tribe of Benjamin mustered up 26,000 men to go up against 400,000. Now, early on, the tribe of Benjamin was actually winning. I mean, they know the territory after all, right? The Israelites were dismayed and even asked God whether they were right to fight, right? God answered yes, right? When a society will not correct injustices in its midst, everyone is guilty, right? The next day, the Israelites defeated the tribe of Benjamin, killing 25,000 men. And it didn't stop there. The other tribes vowed to ban the tribe of Benjamin and would not allow marriages with them. Right? So, we see that from this story, what I love about it is silence in the face of injustice is complacency, right? God states clear as day that when a society will not correct the injustice, they're all guilty. And if we look at other places, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? When we look at, all these places, the Canaanites, the land of Canaan, when we look at all of these places and you say that, well, it was just a few, right? It's a popular argument that, well, it's not everybody doing it, it's just a few. But if those few choose not to stand up against, if the good people in that nation choose not to stand up against the few, then they're just as guilty. And don't underestimate the power of a few. It takes one match to burn down an entire forest, right? The Nazis were few in number, but because the majority wouldn't rally against them, we know what happened, right? Here in America, it took 9 hijackers on 9/11, 2001, to bring America to its knees. There's a lot of times in history where the silent majority is irrelevant, right? And so for people that, say that, well, for example, nowadays, it's all Muslims aren't terrorists. I agree, 100%. Absolutely. I do not believe that all Muslims are terrorists at all. But for the Muslims that are peaceful, that peaceful majority, why aren't they doing anything to stop the extremists? That's my question. It is the radicals and the extremists and the few bad apples that essentially push the agenda, that drives the agenda, and everyone else is silent and afraid, so they don't do anything. Or they have the mindset that, well, it ain't got nothing to do with me. Silence in the face of injustice is complacency. Right? This story is absolutely horrible. It's one of the hardest stories for me to read about in the entire Tanakh, right? What they did to this woman, right? And how the tribe of Benjamin wouldn't back down. I mean, wow. So, the dangers of not having centralized and former leadership are summarized by the book of Judges, right? In those days, there was no king of Israel, right? Everyone did it as he pleased, right? The path to gaining sovereignty in the land would be a difficult one, right? The frequent disobedience to God led to cycles of punishments and repentance, in which the figure of a judge played a very, very important role, right? So I'm not going to take away the power and the influence and the greatness that those judges carried out, essentially, right? The judges were outstanding individuals who led Israel through challenging periods. Yet, the judges cannot unite the nation in a way that established justice, ensured domestic tranquility, provided the common defense, right? Promote general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty. They couldn't do it. A different model of leadership was needed, or at least had to be tried. After 200 years, the call for a king will be deafening, leading to our first king, King Saul. Right? So, was Israel better off without a king? You be the judge. Right? But I think that there are some very important takeaways. You know, one being our ancestors were very stubborn and hard-headed individuals, right? I mean, many like to go back to the way our ancestors and try to go back to the past and, let's do things the same way our ancestors did. And I am of the opinion that absolutely not. I think we're better. And I think that they wanted us to be better. Right? The way that we stubbornly cling to our Jewishness. One thing that Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform can agree on is we're not going to do idol worship like our ancestors did. Right? I mean, and again, this is all Jews here. I mean, Jews fighting the Philistines and whatnot, but, the tribal infighting, it is, again, nothing new. It's nothing new at all. Right? We have constantly tried to find some common ground, and the truth is that we won't all be united until the Mashiach comes. That's the truth. Because ever since, the age of prophecy has ended, there hasn't been a unifying figure in Judaism. I mean, you take the most prominent rabbi that you know, whether it's the Rambam, Rabbi Akiva, and all, they were fantastic rabbis, but there was always a group that disagreed with them and ran off and did their own thing. There was Rabbi Shammai and Rabbi Hillel, right? And there were some that descended from their teachings, and that they couldn't see eye to eye. When it's interesting to note that Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai were actually good friends, right? But, you know, it's very hard for Jews to agree on things unilaterally, right? And that's why I always say Judaism has never been a monolith, right? We all heard the voice of God, our ancestors, on Mount Sinai, and then 40 days after that, it was idol worship, right? I think it's a miracle just in the fact that God hasn't given up on us, right? That as he stated, he never would, right? But I pray that the Mashiach comes and unifies us, and, you know, there won't be so much infighting, because, again, we're not a large enough body to be sitting up here fighting amongst one another like this, right? I always try to look at the positives, right? And so I encourage people, people will ask, how do you stay so positive and your energy and whatnot? And the truth is turn the news off. Just turn the news off. It is so one-sided that anyone watching the news could almost slip into a depression and think that, oh, there's no hope for, humanity and et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is we've come a very long way since our ancestors, right? A very long way. And for all the news that, oh, this person was murdered, this person was killed, this person... So for every person that you're talking about that is being murdered and being killed, nobody is being born. You're not talking about the other side of the spectrum, right? And the way that our minds have evolved over time, right? You see, back then, they called King David, for example, a bloody king, right? He went to war and, didn't back down, and, he was a fighter and brute strength and all that, right? And he was praised for it, right? The people praised him for it. Now, when I look at what's happening in Ukraine, for example, Vladimir Putin, not the biggest fan, right? The way that he's bullying his way into Ukraine and whatnot. If he should succeed, which I hope he doesn't, but if he does, nobody's going to praise him for that. See, our minds have evolved in a way that we don't idolize bullies anymore. We don't look up to people that bully other people, war mongers, or military tyrants. So we have evolved as a people, and that I absolutely love. We're taking mental illness seriously, right? We are, being more cautious to other people's, taking offense to certain things. See, I see the world so differently. I see us as being better. Where at one time, as bad as you think, oh, humanity and people, and why would anybody want to live in this? As bad as you think it is. Do you know that in Noah's time, Noah could not find a group of righteous individuals at his time. Couldn't find any good people. So I say we're getting better. Right? Again, there's always going to be conflict, wars, and whatnot, but our attitudes towards those individuals have changed. Where at one time, Adolf Hitler, the bully, charismatic, etc., and managed to start World War II, and people were in fear of him and fell in line, etc. Now, today, with everyone, how they look at people that abuse their authority and whatnot, and people that they're very cautious, and we're learning from that, our history. We're learning from that. Not to give anyone that much power. And only the weak-minded don't question authority. Only the weak don't challenge authority. Right? But again, the Jewish people have never been a monolith. There were, roadblocks and obstacles every step of the way when from the time, we came into being as Jews, right? I mean, God sent Moses to Pharaoh and sent the 10 plagues, and some of the Jews were upset at Moses because, hey, he's working us harder every time you do this, right? Then we were free, and we went into the desert, right? And certain people lost faith, and that's when God had to come down and actually speak to our ancestors, a mass revelation. And 40 days after that, the golden calf incident. Then, of course, there was Moses' cousin that led a rebellion against Moses, right? Then we go into, the spies go and take a look at the Holy Land. People get discouraged and wanted to go back to Egypt. Yeah, where they were slaves and everything. Some people wanted to go back to that. As we're entering the land of Israel, the promised land, some people wanted to stay in the desert. We've never actually really been united. But it will come when the Mashiach comes. So, that being said, thank you all for watching. If you found this presentation helpful and informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. Be good to yourselves. Be good to others. Again, thank you for tuning in to Blade Talk. And until the next episode, you all take care.